In another courtroom across town, Judge Eleanor Hayes sat tall behind the bench, her expression composed and poised. It seemed like just another routine day, just another case on the docket, or so she believed. The bailiff announced the next case, the state of Louisiana versus James Anderson. Eleanor shifted slightly in her seat, resting her hands atop the smooth, polished wood of the bench. Her eyes scanned the charges on the docket: assault, robbery, resisting arrest. A familiar weight settled in her chest, a blend of disappointment and fatigue. Another life veered off course, she thought. Another soul swallowed by the justice system. But when the defendant entered the courtroom, shackled at both wrists and ankles, her world tilted. The man before her was an unknown. He was James Anderson, her James. Her chest tightened, and a wave of memories washed over her. She saw two kids speeding through the dusty backstreets of Hammond, Louisiana, bicycles rattling and laughter echoing. She remembered whispering secrets beneath the magnolia tree in her backyard, the late night talks and solemn childhood vows to always stand by one another, no matter where life led. But the man in front of her now was no longer the boy from those summers. His shoulders sagged under invisible burdens, his face bore the marks of too many hard years. Still, his eyes, those dark, soulful eyes, were unmistakable. Her hand trembled on the gavel. For the first time in her years on the bench, she faltered. The courtroom seemed to grow smaller, the air heavier, as she tried to absorb what was happening. James lifted his head, meeting her eyes for a fleeting moment. His face registered shock, then quickly masked itself in stoic resignation. Recognition flickered between them, undeniable, but he looked away, dipping his head slightly. The room remained silent, waiting. Eleanor drew in a breath and forced herself to speak. "Mr. Anderson, you are charged with assault and robbery. How do you plead?" His voice was coarse, almost unfamiliar. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Her heart thudded in her chest. A dozen questions formed inside her. What had happened to him? When did their lives veer so far apart? But this bench, this robe, this courtroom required discipline. She couldn't let emotion overtake duty. "Proceed," she said, voice calm though her insides churned. As the prosecutor launched into their opening remarks, Eleanor struggled to focus. This wasn't just another file or another defendant. This was James, and she was faced with the daunting task of separating the tangled threads of her past from the cold, firm lines of her present role. If she didn't, it could all come apart. Her surroundings faded as her thoughts drifted, not to her career or title, but to simpler times, long before courtrooms and black robes. Back when she didn't wear a robe or wield a gavel, Eleanor and James had grown up in Hammond, Louisiana, two kids raised in different worlds despite living just a few miles apart. It wasn't physical distance that kept them separate, but the unwritten rules of their divided town. Her home was a small, single-story house framed by a white picket fence, while his sat weather, beaten at the end of a dusty road bordered by fields. Their friendship had always been unusual. She remembered the day they met, a chance encounter at the edge of a creek where she had wandered too far from her own yard. James had been trying to free his fishing line from a snarl of reeds. She'd offered to help, and from that small moment bloomed years of hidden escapades and whispered dreams. "Eleanor," he'd said once, as they lay in the grass beneath a sky full of stars, "do you ever think about leaving this place? Really leaving? Going somewhere they don't give us looks just for sitting next to each other?" She'd laughed back then, dismissing the thought with a wave. But James had been serious. Even then, he saw the world more clearly than she did, a world that didn't always make space for someone like him. Despite the stares, the murmurs, the open disapproval from both sides, their connection only deepened. Still, the pressure of it all loomed, a constant tension they could never quite shake. And then, one day, it all ended. The summer before high school, her father caught them sitting on the front steps together. His voice, cold and commanding, had cut through the air. "Elinor, get inside." Now, she had hesitated, glancing at James, who stood still, unmoving. "Go on," he'd said softly, his voice edged with acceptance. "I'll see you around," but she never did. Her father forbade her from seeing him, and not long after, James's family left town. Elinor poured herself into school, letting her ambition carry her far from Hammond. Law school, long hours, the pursuit of justice, those became her world. Yet she never forgot the boy who first showed her what bravery looked like. Now, seated on the bench, she couldn't help but wonder what James's life had become after she'd stepped through that door and left him behind. His record showed a series of minor infractions: shoplifting, loitering, nothing that suggested violence. Still, how much could a rap sheet really reveal? The prosecutor's voice jolted her back to the present. He was laying out the details of the charges. The prosecutor began outlining the alleged incident. James was charged with assaulting a convenience store clerk during a robbery in Baton Rouge. The clerk had sustained minor injuries, and the store's cash drawer had been emptied. Authorities apprehended James just a few blocks away, reportedly with the stolen money in his possession. Elinor kept her eyes on James as the details were laid out. His shoulders sagged, hands folded together, and his face betrayed nothing. Did he truly commit this crime, or was there more behind the narrative the prosecution was presenting? When the court broke for lunch, Elinor had time to collect her thoughts. As she returned to her chambers, her assistant Margaret approached with a cautious look. "Judge Hayes, is everything all right? You seemed a bit distracted earlier," Margaret asked gently. Elinor paused. Should she admit she recognized the defendant? Would it cross a line to reveal a personal connection? Instead, she simply replied, "I'm fine, just a lot to consider." But she wasn't fine. How could she be, with a figure from her past sitting across the courtroom, waiting for her to determine his fate? When the trial resumed, the gallery was filled. Reporters scribbled notes, the clerk organized his documents, and the prosecutor, Richard Powell, a composed, sharp-featured man, stood ready to present his argument. "Members of the jury," Powell began, his tone clear and assertive, "this is a case about violence, about a man who entered a convenience store and, without warning, assaulted a clerk before fleeing with the contents of the register. The evidence will demonstrate that James Anderson is responsible for this crime." Elinor felt unease knot her stomach. Powell's delivery was clinical, impersonal. He spoke of James as though he were just another statistic. She cast another glance toward him, but James remained still, eyes downcast. Next, the defense attorney, Lisa Porter, rose to deliver her remarks. Young and poised, her voice projected confidence as she addressed the jury. "The prosecution wants you to believe this is a simple case," she began. "But it's not. My client, James Anderson, has insisted on his innocence from the beginning. We intend to show that the assumptions made during his arrest do not stand up to scrutiny." The first witness was then called to the stand, a clerk who had been present at the store on the night of the alleged robbery. He recounted seeing someone who resembled James enter the convenience store, argue with the cashier, and then leap over the counter. His account was vivid, but Elinor couldn't shake the sense that it sounded rehearsed. During cross-examination, Lisa's approach was precise. "Mr. Chambers, you mentioned the person who assaulted the clerk wore a red hoodie, correct?" "Yes," the witness affirmed. "Did you get a clear look at his face?" "Not exactly. It was dark and his hood was up." Lisa nodded thoughtfully, taking a few steps across the courtroom. "So you can't positively identify the person who committed the assault?" "Well, no, but no further questions?" Lisa interjected, cutting him off smoothly. Elinor noticed James shift subtly in his chair, his shoulders lifting slightly as if the exchange offered a sliver of hope. Next, the prosecution presented a surveillance video from the store. The footage was low quality and dimly lit, showing a person in a red hoodie entering the premises. The prosecution claimed the individual was James, but the video lacked the clarity to confirm any distinct facial details. As the clip played, Elinor focused intently. Was this really James? The figure moved swiftly, reaching toward the counter before vanishing off screen. The video stopped abruptly, leaving a noticeable gap in the narrative. James's defense centered on an alibi. He said he had been walking home from a friend's place at the time of the crime, but the friend refused to testify, citing fears of community backlash. Lisa argued that the absence of a willing witness didn't automatically invalidate James's account. Still, the jury's faces suggested lingering doubts. As the trial continued, Elinor felt the burden of her responsibility weigh heavily. She was meant to be neutral, an emblem of justice, but every moment in that courtroom took her back to their shared past. The boy she'd once known better than anyone now sat before her, fighting to prove his innocence, and she was the one tasked with deciding his future. When the court recessed for the evening, Elinor lingered behind the bench, absent, mindedly running her fingers along the smooth edge of the gavel. She wished she could speak to James, to hear from him directly what had truly transpired, but any interaction outside of court would compromise both the proceedings and her position. From her seat, she watched as James was led out of the courtroom, chained and silent. As James was led away in shackles, Elinor's confidence began to falter. She had always placed her faith in the justice system, its promise to uncover the truth. But now, for the first time, she questioned whether that truth was something the system could ever fully grasp. The courtroom hummed with low whispers as the trial arrived at a crucial point. It was now the defense's opportunity to present their argument, and Lisa Porter called her primary witness to the stand, Officer Daniel Harris, the arresting officer. Elinor leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing in focus. If there were any flaws in the case, this is where they might begin to appear. Officer Harris, a large man with a stern presence, took the witness seat. Lisa approached him calmly and deliberately. "Officer Harris," she began smoothly, "you were the one who apprehended Mr. Anderson, correct?" "That's right," he responded curtly. "In your report, you claimed Mr. Anderson was detained 2 blocks from the robbery location. Is that correct?" "Yes," Harris said. Lisa continued, "And what made you suspect he was the perpetrator?" Harris shifted uncomfortably. He fit the description, a black male in his 40s wearing dark clothes. Lisa raised her eyebrows. Dark clothes, but the suspect captured in the surveillance video was described as wearing a red hoodie. "Did you find a red hoodie on Mr. Anderson when you searched him?" There was a pause. "No, but he might have ditched it," Harris replied. Lisa stepped closer. "Might have, did you, or any officer, conduct a search in the nearby area to locate this hypothetical hoodie?" Harris clenched his jaw. "No, we didn't have time. The arrest happened fast." Lisa pressed further. "So, just to be clear, you detained my client based solely on a vague description and had no physical evidence connecting him directly to the robbery?" Harris didn't answer. His silence spoke volumes. Elinor glanced toward the jury and noted a few members exchanging unsure glances. But Lisa wasn't finished. "Officer Harris, do you recall anything Mr. Anderson said when you arrested him?" He protested. Harris said, "Claimed he was innocent. Did you make any effort to look into his statement, or did you decide he was guilty just based on how he looked?" Color crept into Harris's face. "I followed protocol," he muttered. "Protocol," Lisa echoed, her tone edged with disbelief. "No further questions, Your Honor." As Harris stepped down, the courtroom murmured once again. His credibility had clearly been damaged. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. This trial had become more than just a legal proceeding. It was beginning to feel like a deeper moment of reckoning. Not just for James, but for a justice system far too quick to judge him. The defense's next tactic took many by surprise. Lisa called a forensic expert to the stand, someone who had carefully analyzed the surveillance video. The specialist testified that, when comparing the figure's height and build in the footage, there was no conclusive way to verify it was James. Even more troubling, the footage's timestamp had been tampered with, casting doubt on its reliability. The prosecution tried to undermine the testimony as speculative, but the jury's expressions showed unease. A seed of uncertainty had been planted, and Eleanor felt the tension growing heavier by the second. As the session neared its end, James was offered the chance to speak in his own defense. Though Lisa had cautioned him about the possible consequences, James insisted. Shackles lightly rattling, he approached the stand, his tone subdued but filled with earnest emotion. "I've made my share of bad decisions," James began, locking eyes with the jurors. "I've taken wrong paths and trusted people I shouldn't have, but I didn't do this. That night, I was just walking home, minding my business. The police stopped me, didn't ask a single question, just decided I matched who they were looking for." His voice trembled, but he pressed on. "I've been battling my whole life, trying to be seen as more than a stereotype, but this is exhausting. I just want the truth to matter again." Eleanor felt a lump rise in her throat as he returned to his seat. His words weren't merely a defense. They were a quiet demand for dignity. She scanned the jury. Their faces reflected a complicated blend of compassion, skepticism, and internal debate. This was the turning point. The truth was no longer a question of documentation or testimony. It had become a moral reckoning, a confrontation with deep-seated bias and instinctive judgment. Eleanor understood her responsibility wasn't just to enforce the law. It was to apply it with integrity and in pursuit of real justice. When the trial resumed on its final day, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Closing remarks were delivered with calculated force. The prosecutor focused on the circumstantial evidence, encouraging the jury to rely on the system's processes. Lisa, in contrast, implored them to look deeper, to recognize the inconsistencies, and see the person behind the accusation. Eleanor remained still, her face unreadable, though her mind ran at full speed. Her duty was clear. She couldn't influence the jury's verdict, but if it came to it, she would have the last word. The responsibility for ensuring justice pressed heavily on her shoulders, especially if the jury's verdict left room for ambiguity. Hours passed as deliberations continued. The courtroom emptied and refilled several times while people stretched, whispered in corners, and waited. James sat in silence, his hands tightly folded before him. He hadn't looked in Eleanor's direction since the trial had begun, and she didn't blame him. What could she possibly say to make any of this right? At last, the bailiff stepped forward to announce that the jury had come to a decision. The atmosphere shifted to a tense stillness as the foreperson rose, clutching a sheet of paper that quivered slightly in her grip. In the matter of the state of Louisiana versus James Anderson, she began, "We find the defendant." The pause was excruciating. "Not guilty." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, even a few cheers filled the space. Eleanor quickly brought down her gavel to restore order. James's shoulders dropped as if he had been holding up the sky. Yet his face gave little away. He was free, but the toll of the trial was etched deep. Clearing her throat, Eleanor addressed the room. "The jury has delivered its verdict. Mr. Anderson, you are released. Court is adjourned." People slowly filed out, but Eleanor remained, watching as James completed the final steps of his release. She assumed he might leave without acknowledging her, but then he turned. Approaching the bench with cautious steps, James stood a short distance away, his expression carefully composed. "You didn't owe me anything," he said quietly, "but I just want to know. Why didn't you say something? You remembered me." Eleanor's throat tightened, words sticking. "I couldn't," she replied softly. "I had to remain impartial. Saying anything might have put everything at risk." James studied her face, searching for something. His expression shifted, still hurt, but now with traces of acceptance. "Fair?" he echoed. "That's the problem, Eleanor. The world's never been fair for people like me." She lowered her eyes, her hand resting against the polished bench. "You're right," she said. "I wish I had done more back then. I wish I could have done more now." A quiet sigh escaped James. The tension in his stance seemed to ease. "We were just kids. We didn't know any better. But you do now, don't you?" "I do," she replied, voice resolute, "and I'm sorry." James gave a small nod. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, back straight, his figure gradually vanishing beyond the courthouse doors. Eleanor remained, seated alone, the echo of his words heavy in the stillness. She had enforced the law, yet the trial uncovered a deeper reality. Justice extended beyond verdicts and evidence. It encompassed the lives influenced by systems far greater than any single individual. For Eleanor, this was a powerful awakening, a reminder that her role was not merely one of authority, but a platform for meaningful change. As she exited the courtroom that evening, the fading sunlight cast long shadows over the courthouse steps. Eleanor silently vowed that while she couldn't alter the past, she would dedicate herself fully to ensuring the future offered more than empty promises of fairness. The task would be difficult, perhaps even impossible, but she owed it both to James and to herself to keep trying.